What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be analyzing Manchester United versus Leeds and each of these teams' first games in the Premier League. And before we start, please check out my book. It's online, it's on Amazon, and there's a link in the description below. And be sure to check out the description for Keyframe. There's a link to Keyframe, which is how I make this video, and a few other social media tags that I post content to, as well as my blog. So be sure to check all that out, but let's get right into it. So Manchester United against Leeds played in their 4-2-3-1, similar to how they played last year, except this year they looked very good and looked all on the same page and firing on all cylinders in the first match of the season. So we see their 4-2-3-1 here. Fred just off our screen to the left-hand side, and Bruno Fernandes and Mason Greenwood as the 9 and 10 playing up front. But Manchester United's pressing strategy really utilized a few different things, and they pressed in a very fluid way with players able to change roles. The first of which was Bruno Fernandes jumping out using his cover shadow to block access to the Leeds holding midfielder. As we see in this situation, Robbie Koch is the player who's the Leeds holding midfielder and blocked access by the press of Bruno Fernandes. Then Leeds also went with a very narrow midfield three to try and open up the half space and allow players to invert off the wing. In Leeds build-up, they went with a back four, and they went with a very flat back four with deep fullbacks trying to create space higher up the field and create space on the wing for the wingers to utilize by dropping into or invert, allowing the fullbacks to then occupy the wide area. But as we mentioned before, a very narrow midfield three, which would try and open up half space opportunities for the wingers to invert or to create a dynamic advantage for these Leeds players moving into these positions between Manchester United defensive connections. But as we said, Manchester United in their 4-2-3-1 matched up really nicely against the Leeds 4-3-3. As we see here, there's a clear numerical equality, and the natural positioning of the Manchester United players put them in good positions to stop the Leeds build-up and stop them from progressing. So in the midfield, we have a natural 3-on-3 with Paul Pogba and Daniel James playing a little bit more narrow, giving them access to use their cover shadows to block the half space and giving them very promising positions when they would win the ball in transition. Now in the second half, we can also see Manchester United go from a 4-2-3-1 to a 4-4-2, again using their cover shadow to block the impact of the holding midfielder of Leeds. So typically a big part of Leeds build-up is their holding midfielder and the movement that he provides to then create space elsewhere on the field. But Manchester United did a very good job covering him with their pressing by using their cover shadow, so there was no access to the holding midfielder to disrupt the defensive movements of Manchester United. And again, the narrow positioning of the wide midfielders of Paul Pogba and Daniel James gave them very good opportunity in transition, as well as their two forwards looking to attack the back four and the spaces left by these connections of Leeds back four. Now with the same sequence here, we see Daniel James jumping to press into the wide area in the left fullback of Leeds, and we see the staircase midfield shape of Manchester United when shifting across the field. So each player is on a different horizontal and vertical line, maximizing their spatial control, as well as the forwards staggering themselves to help out in the holding midfield position to take care of Leeds and can prioritize their connections and spatial control, maintaining their compactness. Also, the aggression from the Manchester United center backs limited the opportunity for midfielders to get on the ball or forwards dropping deeper to get on the ball between the lines, because not only was there the use of Manchester United's cover shadow, but also defenders were more than willing to jump and press these actions when Leeds would try and progress, which would ultimately lead to Leeds playing into dangerous areas or tight spaces, which would then lead to them losing possession. So now another instance of Leeds building from the back with their back four. Their left fullback is just off our screen here, and then now we see the narrow positioning of their three central midfielders, and this very narrow but very long connections vertically of their central midfielders again was to open up the half space to then look for wingers inverting or creating a dynamic advantage from this inverting, or from the central midfielders occupying this position by stepping out into the blind side of the Manchester United defenders. But this was not the case, as Manchester United was able to get good pressure around the ball and use their cover shadows effectively, as well as the mobility of their two holding midfielders to cover a large amount of space. And the confidence Manchester United had at the back gave them a huge advantage. So as we see here, the asymmetry in their high block, they have Daniel James press the central defender. So he inverts, which is different from Paul Pogba, as Paul Pogba is responsible just for Luke Ayling, the right fullback. Daniel James inverts to press the central defender. This elicits a response from Wan-Bissaka to jump to then take care of the fullback, as well as being in a position to then cover the winger as well. So this is a trend that we saw in the match that worked very well for Manchester United because of the dual width created by Leeds United. Manchester United was able to create positional superiority through Wan-Bissaka, allowing him to effectively cover two players and put him in a higher position to then have better numbers when they would win possession going forward, as we see their midfield three using their cover shadow, so their players can position higher up the field and create numerical advantage when they do win the ball. And this is how they scored a few of their goals, especially from Bruno Fernandes. So as we see here, Manchester United win the ball with Aaron Wan-Bissaka higher. So we have a three-man defense now with Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw on the weak side. Wan-Bissaka able to start higher up the field because of his jumping in their pressing phase. We have our solid double pivot to then create support of the back three now created, and now we see where the goal is created. So the man orientation by Leeds United around Bruno Fernandes and Mason Greenwood got Leeds into a lot of trouble, because when Bruno Fernandes would make this run in behind, we would have Mason Greenwood fading out wide and then Paul Pogba coming narrow. So the space would be there for Paul Pogba to then receive a diagonal pass, and typically the Leeds defenders would be attracted to the ball to watch the ball, and now they would have free runners in behind. And because of the man orientation, once their player was beaten, so Bruno Fernandes would beat Robbie Koch, then Bruno Fernandes would be free in goal in behind with service from Paul Pogba. Now the offensive setup for Manchester United went with their back four, and the fullbacks would start deep in a wide position. And what would then happen was we would have our two holding midfielders that would play very fluid and always stay connected, but stagger themselves on who was the deepest, most central player and who was able to then go higher. So a lot of time, Fred would then be the lone pivot, and Scott McTominay would go into advanced areas, or vice versa. So then higher up the field, we have Daniel James, Bruno Fernandes, Paul Pogba, Mason Greenwood, all occupying spaces between the lines and creating movement off one another to then overload the space between the lines and get Leeds United players to jump. So some of the problems then we see here is the man orientation from Leeds United. So we have one line of man-oriented defenders, virtually man-marking across the field, and then we have one player deeper than the rest, which would then create a huge amount of space for Manchester United to then go and target in behind for Manchester United, which is why Paul Pogba was able to get on the ball and exploit this space because of his range of passing and the very deep offsides line that was created by this man orientation and single player coverage in the Leeds United defensive setup. When Manchester United were in possession of the ball, we have our central defender carrying the ball from their first third of the field, and when circulation would happen and Manchester United would get on the ball, we would then see the ability for the central defender to drive into the midfield and attract a midfield player or a deeper defender from Leeds United to then potentially jump to then try and put pressure on the ball and make up for this lapse in their defense. So what would happen then, if one of these players were to jump, this would create a free man for Manchester United further forward, further up the field, because one of these players would have to make a decision and leave their man marker of Manchester United, which would then leave one of these players free and allow them to effectively disrupt the Leeds United defense by finding the free man and starting their attack to go further forward. And so that will wrap up today's analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.